So let me give you just a quick introduction and orientation. So there's 4 of us here in this room that are all part of the Climate Literacy Committee of the Sierra Club Bay chapter, which we're all volunteers. I think of you as my volunteer family, Helen, Scott, and Deidre. We've been working together for many years to organize to bring climate literacy to school districts and independent schools. And we've done that purely as volunteers. The reason we've been doing this is that a joint NPR Ipsos poll from spring of 2019 shows that over 90% of teachers and 80% of parents want climate change taught in schools. But we know from our own surveys as well as news reports that most teachers don't feel like they have the background knowledge nor the tools to teach climate change effectively, nor do they have the time or resources to learn. So in this breakout group today, we're going to talk about some successful steps we've taken in the Oakland Unified School District to set policy, create relevant climate change curriculum, and support educators. We're going to be focusing on 4 things. We're going to help you redefine your definition of climate literacy and what students should get in school about climate change. You will work with members here today that are within your own community to take steps towards organizing towards climate change literacy in your school or district. We'll share some curricular and organizing resources that have worked for us in our work. And we'll even help you get started by giving you a step towards making this happen. We've got some email templates that we'll show you in a little bit. So as Debbie had said at the beginning of this plenary session, as we barrel towards the 2020 election, we wrestle with our country's reckoning with racial injustice, plus all of the challenges and tragedies that have come from COVID-19. We know that our schools are juggling many priorities, yet we really believe that a brighter future relies and really requires on students understanding that climate change is happening, that it will impact their futures, and that there are things that they can start doing about it now. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Helen.
All right, thank you, Sarah. And I just wanted to harken back to that for 1 second. I think many of you can see my Zoom background, and I just wanted to project that even in the midst of the retain our sense of what's fun and what's, of being alive. So you can see myself on a giant inflatable flamingo. And I think when we talk about climate change literacy and what students need from us, they need hope and they need to not freak out. And I want us to keep in mind through this session. Just a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Helen Fitzmaurice. I taught high school physics and chemistry in Pittsburgh, as in the end of the BART line, not Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, for several years. And I'm currently a graduate student at UC Berkeley studying air quality. I, with Sarah and Deidre and Scott, have been part of the Sierra Club's Climate Literacy Committee. I live in Oakland, and I also participate as a community member in both the Oakland Education Association Environmental Justice Caucus and the Districts Group Environmental and Climate Change Literacy Working Group. So before we start, I just want all of you to type into the chat, but don't submit. What does climate change literacy mean to you? What do you think all students should learn about climate change in schools? So just take 30 seconds and type that into the chat, but don't hit submit yet. And I'm gonna stare at you awkwardly as you type. And I love what I'm seeing. I love the agency and power. I think that's really important. I understand individual actions affect climate and giving kids a way to sense of what they're seeing in the world. I think those are all really important. And the reason I'm asking you this is I think it's an important question to ask ourselves as we work in climate change literacy. A lot of people really think about climate change literacy in terms of the science classroom, in terms of greenhouse gases. And we're going to talk today about how we need to sort of broaden that and we'll get there. All right, so we are already behind schedule, but that's okay. So this is welcome. I'm gonna abbreviate our case study and tell, but save room for questions. Then we are going to break. We're going to give you the opportunity to work through an inventory. So what is already happening in your school district? Some of you might know a ton, some of you might not know at all, but that's okay. We're going to pair you with people in your district, or if there's no one in your district or school, similar areas, and you're going to do a mapping activity. Basically, you're going to be comparing toolkits with each other and figuring out who are the actors, what is already being done in the area. We're going to hear from 2 speakers, Sarah Snyder of Oakland Unified School District and Scott Dion. You'll have the opportunity, we have a few questions for them, but you'll have the opportunity to ask them questions yourselves. And they both have tons of experience around educating students on climate change. You're going to go back to your breakout groups and next steps for your school or district. And then, if we have time, we'll share out. But I think more importantly, we have an action for everyone to take, and we'll launch back to the main session. All right, so I'm going to try to rush through it, but that need more details. So again, Sarah, Scott, Deirdre, and I represent the East Bay Sierra Club's Climate Literacy Committee. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what climate literacy is, what is our definition, why is it important? I'm going to tell you about the approach our group took, which is to operate at the school district level or within a consortium of independent schools. And I'll walk you through an example in the work that we've done at Oakland Unified School District. Okay, so why climate change literacy? So, and Sarah is going to put a link to the slides into the chat in case for whatever reason you can't see my screen. So, I think we all here think about reducing climate change emissions in terms of group actions, but we know that we can't get out of this by just recycling individually, but I think climate change literacy can have a real impact on individual choices and people's individual carbon footprints. So this professor at San Jose State did a long-term study on students who had taken 1 semester of climate change and found that 1 semester of climate change had a 20% reduction over 10 years in students' greenhouse gas footprint. That's really big. And if we think about all of the things we're doing to track emissions of greenhouse gases, I think in terms of bang for your buck, 20% reduction for 1 semester of learning is really great. I think beyond that, whatever we do, like plenary speaker said, our students are going to have to deal with futures. Whatever there is going to be too much CO2 in the atmosphere. We know climate change is already happening. So we need to give students the skills to deal with this. So I think probably a lot of you have seen the picture on the right of students at Action March. But I want to focus on the picture on the left, which is students in Oakland organizing an event. And you, the picture is Oakland Unified School District. You see each character represents one, and they're mapping out who they're organizing, who they're going to contact. And so climate change provides us an opportunity to real world skills. And the real world skills that they don't always get in school. What is climate change literacy? So the Sierra California passed a resolution defining what it thought climate change literacy is, and that's sort of going to be our reference point. So I think a lot of people know, a lot of people think science class, knowing the causes of climate change and understanding its potential for harm. I really want to highlight number 4 and 5. So what is required of us as a society to avoid climate destabilization? What are the actions needed to ensure a livable future? Whether that means adaptation, and I think that it does. And then 5, the key people and institutions involved in implementing those actions. So it can't just be something for science class. This is not from the Sierra Club, but I want to add something. I think it's really important that we make climate literacy relatable to students, hopeful, and about climate justice. So this is a picture of some student posters of a school teacher. This was a 6th grade project in OUSD, and everybody hears about Greta, the white girl who is fighting for the climate. But there are all these youth activists, climate activists of color. And so what this teacher did was they opened up a conversation about environmentalism and race, in middle school, and had students research youth climate activists of color. And I think that's really important. Okay, so how do we work on trying to make this happen? So, we have this resolution and we want to pick wand and have all students graduate climate literate. At what scale can we work on this and try to support that? And we got together in, it was end of 2016, beginning of, but we decided that instead of focusing on the state level or national level, the place to really make change is at the school district or independent school level. So our strategy to get buy-in from all of the school districts, so students, teachers, administrators, and politicians, to pass resolutions around climate change, about the of climate change at the school district or independent school level, and then support implementation, and importantly, structures that will reach all the students in that district or school in an action-oriented curriculum. To just give you an idea of the timeline, so in the winter of 2016, we established this committee. We were in January 17 by a bunch of OUSD teams. How we decided to put a lot of focus on OUSD. We drafted a resolution and then worked with a host of people. So students, local and tech, parents, members of the Oakland Teachers Union's Environmental Justice Caucus. All of these people came to school board meetings. They wrote, they did. And in June 2018, we got a preliminary board policy passed. Board policy, a district group, the Environmental and Climate Change Working Group, is formed. And I argue district buy-in is really key because they have the capacity to reach all of the teachers in a district. In January 2019, we got policy passed. And then in the 2019-2020, and now again this school year, both EJC, the Environmental Justice Caucus, and the Environmental and Climate Change Literacy Working Group have been working together to put on teacher workshops, write grants, paying teachers to develop curriculum. I want to highlight.
Hey, Helen, one second. It's breaking up a fair amount, at least for me. And I'm wondering, you usually have such good internet. And so I'm just wondering if it's like where you're sitting or something. Is anyone else, be brave, come off mute. Is anyone else having that same? Okay, so it's not just me. So Helen, would you want me to do you want me to take over for a couple minutes and you could relocate or something?
Yeah, why don't you do that? And I will try relocating. I'm not sure. Thank you.
Here we go for just a minute. So what Helen was reinforcing was, back to the timeline, was how important district support was, and really how important working through the school district where it was to form something tangible out of this resolution that the district passed. So I think we're all familiar with resolutions where something very nice on paper gets passed, but nothing happens from it. What was really impressive with what Oakland did was the school board passed a resolution that included in it the creation of this working group, ECCL, that was tasked with figuring out how to actually bring climate curriculum into the schools. So what that enabled after the passage in January 19 was the creation of and the funding, small funding for teacher workshops, grant writing, and even small stipends for teachers to participate in developing curriculum. So just moving past that, again, this is what we just mentioned. The policy was binding in the sense that it actually created a working group, and that working group has been really tireless in looking for opportunities for teachers to develop curriculum and writing grants, including a grant just awarded 2 weeks ago that Deidre and Helen wrote for the National Geographic Society that resulted in a $50,000 pool of money to go towards distance learning projects in Oakland. So this really has outcomes that are significant from a funding standpoint and from a progress standpoint. I'm gonna just touch briefly on this because it shows, and maybe Deidre, not to put you completely on the spot, but if you would want to talk about the relationship between OUSD, the EJC, and ECHL. Is there anything you want to talk about with this?
Yeah, I think it's important that we have these different groups because ECHL is the district's way of getting stuff done, which is a little bit more bureaucratic and slow, and not in the classrooms as legitimate, as quickly as we would want. And it's interesting that the Environmental Justice Caucus ends up having teachers who, several of us have retired in the course of this because it's like Kate sort of retired in order to work just sort of full time on doing climate literacy. And
yeah,
I mean, I've done other things as well, but that's basically what I'm doing too. So that this is a way that also this is teachers having the network of talking to people that you were teaching with just very recently, and it's peer to peer, and that's the strength of the way that we first got a small grant the year before from the Rose Foundation and reached out to like 12 people and 14 people, and now we're trying to get more people working on this, and so that we're working from the ground up rather than from the top down.
Mm-hmm. I think it's such a great point, and I'm certainly, we see how it works in Oakland. Just that you want as many partners, especially I feel like in the climate change space, you have a lot of different groups that are organizing towards the same goal, but they have different means of getting there. And the more you can cooperate and know what your strengths are and lean on each other a little bit, the better. So ECHL and EJC don't have to have the same tactics or even the same like philosophy. We're all focused on the same goal, and so it becomes cooperative. But the EJC can push ECHL a little bit, which I think ends up being really helpful.
It wouldn't work just to have the school district say this is how it's done, partly because the relationship between the teacher and the teachers union and the district is not entirely without conflict.
Right.
So it's a way of teachers having agency in their own classrooms and not taking orders.
Yep. So these are some examples of what OUSD is now doing in terms of climate change literacy. Teachers are being trained in mapping tools and Oakland specific climate issues. And when we think about what Armando was saying about equity and environmental justice, this is all playing out very much in Oakland. And so as the teachers, because the curriculum development is local, that's all being brought into how it's being taught and what's being taught. And just back to that idea of like this broad ecosystem, there are a lot of players, and it's a very, it's not a competitive space, but the coordination takes a lot of effort. So everyone, again, is like invested in the same goals, and there are a lot of ways to get there. And sometimes just the coordination piece can feel kind of overwhelming itself, but it's the more you can bring in to have sort of builds the impact, the better. And then back, this is Helen's favorite slide, and I see some chats, and so I'm wondering, Helen, how are you feeling?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, I think, thank you, Sarah and Deirdre, for jumping in. I jump back and add one thing that the DISC working group has that we have is to apply for really, really big grants. Not they close to success last, you know, the EJC is able to support sort of on the order of 30 teachers, but we're hoping that the district will be able to support many, many more. I just wanted to go forward, Sarah. Sorry. All right. I think this point is really, really important, and it's difficult. It means in the district, it means every student, no matter what neighborhood, no matter what school they go to, get climate policy, and they're uplifted by it. So again, this picture is a bunch of organizing event in OUS, a geographically, you know,
her internet is
running in the face.
Helen, it is still hard to hear.
All right, I'm gonna turn it back to Sarah. I'm sorry.
No. So some general lessons that Helen put together. And we've been touching on this as we've been going, and after this, Steve will break into groups, and Steve, I'll connect with you on the side to just make sure that happens really quickly. Sorry for the multitasking. Actually, sorry for everyone, I'm gonna call a quick audible because I'm a big football fan. Helen, do you wanna work with Steve to make those assignments? We've got some people in this group who have not yet identified what district they're in. So you've got 1 more minute to rename yourself. And if you don't let us know who you are, we're gonna just put you in a group that doesn't have many people. But the rest of you will be grouped by the district that you've put in your title. Make sense? Helen, is that okay with you?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so just a couple general lessons, and then we're going to send you off into these small groups. One is it is really hard to reach all teachers and students in a district, and it's probably not realistic. You're not going to talk to everyone. Do keep trying, because to Helen's point on that last slide, with all of this idea of this mapping exercise was that you really do want to reach as many people as you can. You don't want this, in the Oakland example, to just be a hills thing or a flats thing. You don't want it to only focus on a specific school. You want to engage the whole district. And you do that by thinking about who you know and what connections you have. Don't let a few negative reactions or people stop you from continuing in that. That's number one. Number two, work to make groups in a district take ownership of the process. So here you are, you might be somebody who lives in Berkeley or Oakland or Vallejo, and you're interested in taking this forward. You're not going to be able to do it on your own. And really, people within the district who are working with the schools need to take some ownership of this. So the most effective thing we've seen with Oakland and in the future with Berkeley and Fremont is that we provide a supporting role. We provide a role of moving things forward. making connections, but it can't just be, so it can't just be a science teacher, but we also shouldn't take on that burden ourselves as organizers. There are a lot of, number 3 is there are a lot of environmentally oriented curriculum providers, which is awesome. It can become overwhelming, especially for a teacher who's feeling like they don't know where to start. So as organizers, make connections, don't reinvent the wheel. We're gonna, when we come back together at the end of this breakout, we have several resources for curriculum as well as partnerships that we will share with you. And just the most effective thing you can do is make those connections so people don't have to start from scratch. And then the last thing is implementation within a school district or an independent school is not easy. Teachers are already overworked and probably never more so than this year with the remote learning. We need to pay them. If we're asking teachers to learn something new about climate change, no matter how motivated they might be, they need to be paid. And that needs to be a real key component of any conversation about bringing climate literacy into schools. Any questions before we break you into your groups? I'm gonna stop sharing just for a second because I want to see your faces. Okay. Okay. Well, then in that case, are people ready to break into groups? We're gonna break into groups for, and we'll take you through. We've got Deidre, Scott, Helen, and myself will be leading those groups. You'll see a pop-up in just a minute that takes you into the group that you are assigned to. And we've got some material to do in those smaller group settings. So be prepared to participate there.
Before you head out, could I speak just briefly?
Sure.
I'm Hari Lamba, and I've just newly published a book called Brighter Climate Futures, a global energy, climate, and ecosystem transformation that got published by a Berkeley publisher called the Regent Press. And I am really want to make myself available, the new book and the resource available as for education, as supplemental education in schools and colleges, so that I'm available as a resource. I am planning to start an open climate university that would be available to all the schools and universities in the world. But I can make myself available on a formal or a semi-formal basis to the Oakland and the local area school districts.
Thank you, Hari. Thank you so much for sharing. Thanks for coming, and thank you for sharing.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, and so Helen and Steve, I know this has been a we're shifting around a bit. Are you ready to break out into groups?
I'm starting to assign people.
Okay.
Can you hear me now, or should I?
Yeah, that's sounding good.
Okay, great. I'm going to turn.
Oh,
And
yeah.
no.
Well, just go for 5 seconds.
All
I'll
right. I'm gonna my screen, but it need be in. All right. So again, you know, as we said in the beginning, we're going to have a speaker panel, and so Deidre Snyder is here with us today. She was a long-term Spanish teacher in Oakland Unified School District who brought climate change into Spanish class. She was also a founding member and is the current president of the Oakland Education Association Environmental Justice Caucus. Scott Dion is a first head who's worked with teachers around environmental issues for decades. And since he's worked the Bay Sierra Club's Committee on Climate Change Literacy, helping schools, lots of independent schools, commit to climate change. So we have two opening questions for our panelists, and so, you know, but as they speak, please feel free to put your own and let this proceed organically on your questions. So first of all, Scott, you've been involved in organizing many schools and many teachers with their own school to teach climate change literacy. Where do you start and how do you build that?
So you want me to take it from here for a moment?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's come up over and over again in conversations I've had with schools. And people have different ideas about where they should start and how they go on. The conversation we just had 5 minutes ago, Ruskell was talking about being a school board member at Vallejo School District. And so that's starting from the school board level. It's also possible, I've talked to people where there is an environmental group amongst the high school students, and so they're starting from there. It's also very possible that there are teachers who are on fire about this issue, and they want to know how to go about doing it from their perspective. And I guess my feeling about that is you can start from anywhere, but you do need to build in those other areas. If you're a teacher, get some students involved and go to your school board or whoever might be in charge of the whole school or the whole school district. If you're at the school district level, like Ruskell is, then it would seem to me the next step would be to get into the schools and start talking to teachers and administrators and finding those people who are champions of climate change literacy. And so do that first and build out. And then at some point, you need a unified, and this is what the Sierra Club's been great about, is trying to get people to commit to a unified set of ideas and get a broad coalition of people who are willing to do that. And I can expand later if people have questions.
Thank you, Scott. And then from you, Drew, how do you teach climate change in Spanish? English or history class, often climate change is related as to the science class. So we know it's important to teach in non-science classes.
So I think it's important, and what I did when I was teaching climate change in Spanish was I was doing the basic science in Spanish. Well, we had two sections of it. I also taught in Spanish, we talked about disasters and nature and stuff. And so that was look at the fact that there is climate change. And then the second part became the science behind why that's happening and then trying to imagine the future. So what I have to work on now is helping other Spanish teachers understand the basic science because they are infamously not all that scientifically minded. We'll work on it. There are two things I think that are really important about it, aside from reinforcing just the science and the reality. It's also real important for kids to imagine the future and what they can do to change it. And so instead of it just being a lot of facts, they need to think about how we have to live differently. And there are ways that you can do that in English and history classes and in all kinds of ways. So there's both expository writing and trying to convince people of stuff. And then there's also fiction. And so kids can both read and write fiction for that. And I think the other thing is that the teaching climate change because it is an existential reality that the kids have to learn about. And they have to try and deal with it. It's really outside of like pleasing the teacher. They should have an outside the classroom responsibility there. And that is real important because it's against sort of the real world and not just the person that if I do this for the teacher, she'll say it's right. The objective reality, you can ask them to go out and do something. And whether it works or not, they're not being graded by a teacher, they're being graded by their experience. The grade isn't what they're working for. You're working because you really want something to happen. And then you might have to learn that, the school board's harder to work with than you thought. but at least you tried, right? And at least you learned that. So is that all I need to say right now? I mean, I have much more to say about this, but and I will say that the other thing that was wonderful about teaching about climate change in Spanish was that you can go to the websites of various national governments, Spanish-speaking countries, and they have all kinds of resources where they're teaching their populations about climate change and how to adapt. And so what I love is that in Peru, the national government says, one of our ways of dealing with this is going back to our traditional indigenous practices for growth and then adding on the new stuff, adding on solar panels, adding on. Okay.
Thank you, Deidre. That's great. We're going to take 3 more minutes for questions, and then we'll go back into our breakout groups, and I'll cover what we're going to do next then. But any questions for Scott and Deidre? I see a comment in here from Shanti about just the appreciation of keeping the visioning a positive future as being a really important sort of perspective on it.
What's really, really important to me in this is so much of what I do see people teaching is like the dystopia stuff. And that's very male dominated war fight stuff. That's just, so the 2 books that I would recommend are Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, which suddenly it's like, all of a sudden everyone's discovered that. And there's a new book that's called The New Wilderness, which is about an attempt to deal with climate change by going back to the old ways, the indigenous ways, which is much more helpful. Okay.
What was that one called again? Sorry.
The second one, it's just come out. It's called The New Wilderness by Diane Cook.
Okay, I'll look those up and put both links in the chat when we come back. Those are helpful. Deidre, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to expand upon the positive visioning for the future. For one reason, it helps everybody feel good rather than bad. And we're in a very black, white, good, bad kind of time in our US frame of mind anyway. But I'm on several global calls with people co-creating a positive future, a lot of spiritual people who look into how powerful our mindset is for creating our future. And I know the science is part of all of that, but I think with children, they're so imaginative and also, in tune, that if we can tap into that and create beauty everywhere. I know when I've come back from travels, especially Europe, I'm like, where are the flowers? They have flowers everywhere. And, like Oakland started that daffodil project. I mean, just beautifying our environment. Today, as I was walking the dog, I realized, why can't we give teenagers jobs in teams to go around picking up trash? I mean, however you can beautify that, it's needed. It will help all of us, it gives people jobs, and it helps the environment. You know, if we can just, the simple things that have a large impact. Teenagers don't always have money. Petty crime is rampant, has been for years. Richmond did something where they gave kids money for a while and crime went down. So, you know, creative solutions from the local to the global, but the main thing I think is to be positive. So that's my filter now. If someone starts being negative, I'm just like, I don't want to hear it. You know, I know what's happening up to now, but I want to hear positive going into the future.
That's great, Shanti. Thank you. That's actually a really great way to send us back into our small groups. So what we're going to do next is go back into our groups and, oh my gosh, I'm always the worst when it comes to sharing. Okay. We have the assignment we've got now is we've got about, I think 15 minutes or so to do this. Is based on what you've learned from this panel. I do know it was abbreviated, but just sort of take some of those themes of working within your communities and of that positive mindset, I think is wonderful. Is there anything you would add to the mapping exercise that you did in the previous breakout? You can go back and add to it. And then based on the information you've accumulated so far, what do you think the next steps would be in your school or district? Outline what implementation might look like in your district and come up with an action you could take as a group to move climate literacy forward. So what you'll see when you get into there, if someone makes sure to go back and reference this deck, this presentation, and you can make your notes directly into this. Everything sound good? So a few things that we want to send you on your way with. There's a few links here that are specific to curricular resources. And one thing that came up in our small group was needing to make sure that we're thinking about grade appropriate material. And there's a lot out there that is grade appropriate. I think the youngest I've seen the idea of bringing climate change into a classroom is 3rd grade. I think earlier than that, we can talk about the environment and nature and stuff, but I think this idea of climate change is too much developmentally for someone younger than mine.
I beg, there's a 2-year-old who's gone viral. I know a 2-year-old at the beach where I swim who's all into recycling. You know,
Totally.
Yeah, it's.
Shanti, completely agree. Recycling, stewards of the environment, those kinds of things, absolutely. And I agree. I've got a 6 and 8-year-old, and they know black bin versus green bin, and they've known it since they were toddlers. But in terms of like really teaching about like climate change and what it means, I think it can get kind of scary. And I've seen it with my older son. He heard another news report and said, God, I think humans are just really bad and shouldn't be on this planet. And so you want to get to that and teach it in a positive way, but you don't want to like necessarily expose kids to these really scary ideas when they don't quite have enough like framework to put it into. So that's what I've seen in terms of recommendations. But yes, there's always other exceptions to that. And stewards of the environment is something we should be teaching. Being good stewards of the land is something we should always teach kids. So there's some links here. You guys have this presentation. You can get in there and look at them. We also have a lot of resources on environmental justice and climate action, organizing, and kind of what groups that you could get involved with to help. And Helen, I love this slide because you really articulated the sort of the growth or the different levels of impact these have, or spheres of influence. So YVA is phenomenal, and it's at a very local level. They're very active here in the Bay Area. Rose Foundation, Mycelium, is that said right? Okay. 350 Bay Area. ACE, or Alliance for Climate Education, has a national focus. Extinction Rebellion is global, and so there are Fridays for the Future. So there's a lot of ways to get in here. And these are some additional ideas of things that you can do. We've been talking about a lot of these in our small groups, but here are some additional steps. And Olga, we were talking about like, what step do we take? Here are a lot of inspirations, ways to think about getting involved. This is all Helen's absolute focus as a PhD student at Cal, but air quality, the different ways that as a citizen you can be involved in science on the ground and as a way for teaching about climate change. Helen, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think there's no one clincher resource for teachers. But I think, you know, if you're talking to people about climate change literacy and you're talking to teachers or students, I think one thing that's really important is understanding not just the global impacts, but really seeing what climate change is wherever your students are and how it, you know, seeing the impacts and understanding how it impacts their lives and sort of zooming in at the local level is really important.
And then lastly, these are, this is work that has come directly out of our climate literacy group with the Sierra Club. And I have a lot of gratitude for for the Sierra Club creating this, bringing us together 4 years ago. And then honestly, being very supportive as an organization of what we have done independently. So the Sierra Club is they got us going, but we are very much sort of like that mycelium group. We are networked in so many different directions now. And that's how this work needs to happen, is that we're pretty autonomous and independent of the Sierra Club, although we've benefited greatly from their nourishment. So the Sierra Club Climate Chapter Climate Literacy Committee has put together, we have put together a one-pager model resolution for public schools that you could take, you could open up, download, customize for your district, take right to your school board. It shouldn't be your first step. You should have more of a consortium before you do that, but it gives you a really nice starting point for what it is we're talking about when we talk about climate literacy. We have the same, but modified slightly for independent schools. And Scott has been phenomenal in his organization with independent schools and getting them on board. So those are two model resolutions that you have at your disposal. And then a getting started toolkit, which similar to what we've just been looking at, it provides almost a checklist of if you're just like showing up in your district and you want to start mobilizing, what should you think about first? How do you start to build that community before you go and ask for someone to pass a policy? So those are there for you. Any final thoughts or comments?
Thank you for a very well organized session.
Thank you, Shanti. It's nice to hear.
It makes it very clear on how to connect with people.
Appreciate that. Helen has really been, again, I'm going to keep saying that, but like, she's really been great at distilling, because it's honestly been 4 years of what sometimes feels confusing. So it's great to be able to distill it, and hopefully that creates an easier model to use in the future. And I really appreciate all of your participation and joining us this morning. We hope it was useful for everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Deidre. Thank you, Helen.
Thanks to everyone.